The pounding started around 9:30 that Saturday night in October 2018, right when I was getting ready to watch a movie alone in my apartment. I was 28 then, had just moved to Denver 6 months earlier for a marketing job, and was living in this old brick building from the 60s with paper-thin walls and creaky floors. My place was on the 3rd floor, Unit 3B, sandwiched between 2 other apartments that usually stayed pretty quiet, except for the occasional TV noise or footsteps. I remember I had just made myself some popcorn and was settling into my couch when the banging erupted from 3C next door. Not knocking, but desperate rhythmic pounding that made my entire wall vibrate. Between the impacts, I could hear a man's voice, muffled but urgent, saying my name over and over. "Jessica, Jessica, please come quick." I knew the voice belonged to my neighbor Grant, this guy in his 40s who'd lived there for years and mostly kept to himself, except for the polite nods we'd exchanged in the hallway. The pounding got more intense, and then I heard him clearly through the wall. "Jessica, someone's hurt bad. Please, I need help. Open your door." My first instinct was to grab my phone and call 911, but something about the raw panic in his voice made me jump up and rush to my door. I pressed my ear against it, trying to hear better, and Grant's voice came again, closer now, like he was right outside in the hallway. "Jessica, please, she's bleeding. I don't know what to do. Just come to my door. Hurry." I grabbed my keys and phone, my heart hammering against my ribs, and slowly turned the deadbolt. The hallway was dimmer than usual. One of the overhead bulbs had burned out earlier that week, and the landlord hadn't fixed it yet, leaving these long shadows stretching across the worn burgundy carpet. Grant's door was maybe 15 feet from mine, and I could see it was cracked open about 6 inches, just darkness visible through the gap. "Grant," I called out, taking a step into the hallway, and his voice came immediately from inside his apartment. "In here, quick, please." But something made me pause right there in my doorway. Maybe it was how his voice sounded exactly the same as before, like a recording being played back, with that same inflection on the word please. I gripped my phone tighter, already pulling up the dial pad for 911, when I noticed something that made every muscle in my body tense up. There were no sounds coming from inside his apartment except his voice. No crying, no movement, nothing that suggested someone injured. That's when I caught movement in my peripheral vision, down at the far end of the hallway near the stairwell. I turned my head just enough to see Mr. Brennan from 3A, the unit on the other side of mine, standing there in the shadows. He was this skinny older man, maybe 60-something, with thick glasses and a habit of wearing the same gray cardigan every day. And he was just standing there, not moving toward his door or the stairs, just watching me. The strange thing was he had his hands behind his back and was rocking slightly on his heels, like he was waiting for something. When our eyes met, he gave me this little nod and started walking toward me, not rushing, just taking these measured, deliberate steps down the hallway. "Everything all right, Jessica?" he asked, in this soft, almost sing-song voice that I'd never heard him use before in the 2 years we'd been neighbors. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get back inside my apartment, but I was caught between Grant's door, still calling my name, "Jessica, she's dying, please," and Mr. Brennan closing the distance between us with those steady, purposeful steps. I pressed 911 on my phone, but kept it at my side, not raising it to my ear yet, trying to look calm while my mind raced through what was happening. "Grant needs help," I said to Mr. Brennan, taking a small step backward toward my door, testing his reaction. His face did this weird thing where he smiled, but only with his mouth, his eyes staying completely flat behind those thick lenses. "Oh yes, I heard all that noise too," he said. "Terrible thing. Why don't you go help him? I'll make sure nobody disturbs you." The way he emphasized "nobody disturbs you" made my throat go dry. I noticed his hands were still hidden behind his back, his knuckles making small movements like he was gripping something. Grant's voice came again from his apartment, louder this time, more desperate. "Jessica, I can't stop the bleeding, please." But here's what really made me realize I was in danger. His voice was coming from the exact same spot as before, hadn't moved an inch within the apartment. When I glanced at his cracked door, I could see through the gap that his living room light was off, but there was this faint blue glow, like from a phone screen held low. Mr. Brennan was now only about 10 feet away, still approaching with that empty smile. He tilted his head slightly and said, "Grant really does need you in there, Jessica. He's been talking about you for weeks, you know. Says you're perfect." My thumb found the call button on my phone, and I started backing up faster toward my door. But then Grant's door suddenly swung open wider, and I saw a hand grip the door frame from inside. Not Grant's hand, because Grant had these small, soft hands I'd noticed when he'd helped me carry groceries once. This hand was huge, with thick fingers and dirt under the nails, wearing what looked like a latex glove. I hit the call button and spun around, launching myself toward my apartment door. But Mr. Brennan moved faster than I expected for his age, lunging forward and grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. Now, Jessica, that's very rude when your neighbor needs help," he hissed, his breath smelling like cigarettes and something medicinal. I could feel his other hands coming around from behind his back. I yanked my arm hard and screamed, not a scared whimper, but a full-throated primal scream that echoed down the hallway, while the 911 operator's voice came tiny and distant from my phone. "911, what's your emergency?" Mr. Brennan's grip loosened for just a second, probably not expecting me to be so loud, and I jerked free, stumbling toward my door while screaming my address into the phone. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps emerging from Grant's apartment, multiple sets of feet, and Grant's real voice, not the recorded one, saying something angry and frustrated that I couldn't make out. I crashed into my door, scrambling with the keys, while looking back to see 3 figures now in the hallway. Mr. Brennan, a massive man I'd never seen before, wearing work coveralls and those latex gloves, and Grant himself, who looked nothing like the nervous, fidgety neighbor I knew. His face was calm, focused, and he was holding what looked like a roll of duct tape in one hand and zip ties in the other. The 911 operator was asking questions, but I just kept screaming my address and 3 men trying to break in over and over while jamming my key into the lock. The big man in coveralls started moving toward me, not running, but walking with this terrible confidence, like he knew he could catch me. My key finally turned, and I threw myself inside, slamming the door and turning the deadbolt just as bodies crashed against it from the other side. The door shook in its frame, and I heard Mr. Brennan's voice, calm and instructional. "Grant, you said the landlord gave you the master key last month." My entire body went cold as I heard metal scraping against the lock, and I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my kitchen chair and wedged it under the door handle, then ran to my bedroom window that faced the street. The 911 operator was still on the line, now saying units were on the way 2 minutes out, but I could hear my deadbolt starting to turn. I yanked open the window and started screaming into the night. "Help! Someone help me! They're breaking in! Call 911!" A couple walking their dog looked up, confused at first, then the woman pulled out her phone when she saw my panic. The deadbolt clicked open, but the chair held for a moment, the door jamming against it as they pushed from the outside. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, still screaming, making as much noise as possible. That's when I heard the beautiful sound of sirens in the distance. The pushing against my door stopped abruptly, and I heard quick footsteps in the hallway, Grant's voice saying, "Go, go," and then door slamming. Through my peephole, I could see the hallway was empty, but I didn't move that chair or open that door until I saw the police officers' uniforms through the peephole 5 minutes later. When I finally let them in, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand, and one officer had to help me to my couch while I explained everything that had happened. The fake emergency, the coordinated trap, how they'd clearly been planning to take me into Grant's apartment for God knows what purpose. The police found Grant's apartment exactly as I described. His phone was still on the coffee table with a voice recording app open, showing multiple saved files with my name in them, recordings of him saying different emergency scenarios. In Mr. Brennan's apartment, they found a notebook with detailed notes about all the female residents in the building. our schedules, when we had visitors, when we were alone, which ones had boyfriends, which ones didn't. My page had stars next to it and a note that said, "Third floor, minimal foot traffic, Saturdays." The big man in coveralls had vanished, but they found out from the landlord that Grant had indeed convinced him to give him a master key, claiming he needed it to help elderly residents when the landlord was unavailable. They arrested Grant and Mr. Brennan that night. Grant tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that he really did have someone injured in his apartment, but the complete absence of any victim or evidence, plus the recording equipment and Brennan's stalking notebook, told a different story. I moved out 3 days later, stayed with a friend while I found a new place, and I still check every lock twice before I sleep. The district attorney told me they'd both taken plea deals to avoid trial. Grant got 8 years for attempted kidnapping and conspiracy. Brennan got 6 years. They never found the third man, which honestly still keeps. Last year around this time, everything in my life went from normal to absolutely terrifying in a matter of weeks, and it all started with me asking my neighbor to turn down his music. At 34, raising my 8-year-old daughter Chloe by myself in Columbus, Ohio wasn't always easy, but we'd found our rhythm in this modest apartment complex off Hamilton Road. My job as a dental hygienist kept us comfortable enough, not rich by any means, but we could afford our 2-bedroom ground floor unit and still have money left over for Chloe's dance classes every Saturday. After my divorce 2 years earlier, this place felt like our sanctuary, a fresh start where nobody knew our business and we could just be ourselves. Building C, apartment 12, had become our little haven, surrounded by mostly older residents and young families who smiled politely in passing but minded their own business. We'd been there 8 months without a single issue, which made what happened next even more shocking. Everything changed when Dustin moved into apartment 14 right next door to us in early September. 22 years old, according to the maintenance guy who loved to gossip, Dustin looked exactly like you'd expect a kid fresh out of college to look. Skinny as a rail, patchy facial hair that desperately wanted to be a beard, always wearing these ratty band shirts for groups I'd never heard of. His parents must have been helping with rent because there was no way someone his age could afford this place on their own, not with the fancy gaming setup I saw him hauling in through his door. For about a week, things were fine. I'd see him checking his mail or heading out with a backpack slung over one shoulder, and we'd exchange those awkward neighbor nods. But then came the music, and holy hell, this wasn't just someone playing their stereo a bit too loud. Every night, starting at 11 on the dot, right when Chloe and I were settling into bed, these pounding bass lines would shake our entire apartment like we lived next door to a nightclub. After 2 weeks of this torture, with Chloe falling asleep in class and me messing up at work from pure exhaustion, I finally worked up the courage to knock on his door. It was a Saturday afternoon around 2 o'clock, and I could hear him moving around in there playing video games, lots of shooting sounds and him yelling at someone through a headset. I knocked 3 times before he answered, and when he finally opened the door, he only cracked it about 6 inches, peering at me through the gap like I was trying to sell him something. His apartment reeked of weed and energy drinks, and I could see empty pizza boxes stacked on every surface behind him. I put on my friendliest smile, introduced myself properly as his neighbor from apartment 12, and explained as politely as possible that the late-night music was keeping my daughter awake on school nights. I even made sure to say please, mentioned that I understood he was young and probably didn't realize how thin these walls were, and asked if he could maybe use headphones after 10 p.m. His reaction should have been my first warning sign that something was seriously wrong with this kid. Instead of apologizing or even acknowledging what I'd said, he just stared at me for this long, uncomfortable moment, his eyes moving slowly from my face down to my feet and back up again, not in a checking me out way, but more like he was memorizing every detail about me, filing it away for later use. When he finally spoke, his voice was this weird monotone, completely flat. Nobody else has complained. That was it. No sorry, no acknowledgement that maybe blasting music at 2 a.m. might disturb people. Just that one sentence delivered like a robot. I tried again, keeping my voice light and friendly, explaining that my daughter was only 8 and really needed her sleep for school. He tilted his head slightly like a confused dog and said, "Sounds like a you problem, not a me problem." Then he shut the door in my face, not slammed it, just calmly, slowly closed it while maintaining eye contact through the shrinking gap until it clicked shut. That night, the music was louder than ever, and I swear he'd moved his speakers right up against our shared wall. But it wasn't just regular music anymore. He was playing the same song on repeat for hours, this heavy metal track with someone screaming about violence and revenge. Chloe was in tears, covering her ears with her pillow, and I finally had enough. I called the apartment complex's after-hours line and filed a noise complaint, giving them all the details about my attempt to resolve it directly with him first. The security guy who answered said he'd send someone over to talk to Dustin, and sure enough, about 30 minutes later, the music stopped completely. I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe getting talked to by management would make him realize he couldn't act like he owned the place. Chloe finally fell asleep around midnight, and I remember lying in my bed feeling relieved that I'd stood up for us, that things would go back to normal now. Monday morning, I opened my door to take Chloe to school and found our welcome mat covered in what looked like dog crap, smeared deep into the fibers with a stick or something. The smell hit us immediately, and Chloe started gagging while I tried to shield her from seeing it properly. But here's the thing. Nobody in our building had dogs. It was against the lease agreement, which meant someone had deliberately brought this here and rubbed it into our mat. I had to throw the whole thing in the dumpster and scrub our doorstep with bleach while Chloe waited in the car, making us 20 minutes late. When I got home from work that evening, I found a note tucked into our door frame, printed in block letters. "Karma's a bitch." No signature, of course, but I knew exactly who it was from. I kept the note, took pictures of everything, and emailed the apartment management company. But their response was basically that without proof it was him, they couldn't do anything except keep an eye on the situation. Within a week, things escalated in ways I never could have imagined. First, I started hearing rumors from other neighbors. Apparently, Dustin had been telling people I was a prostitute who brought men home while my daughter was sleeping. Mrs. Garrett from apartment 16, this sweet elderly lady who used to babysit Chloe sometimes, actually pulled me aside near the mailboxes to ask if I was in some kind of trouble and needed help. When I asked what she meant, she got all flustered and said Dustin had warned her to be careful around me because I was involved in dangerous activities and had questionable men coming and going at all hours. I was mortified. This 70-year-old woman who'd baked cookies for Chloe was now looking at me like I might be running some kind of escort service out of my living room. I tried explaining what was really happening, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Dustin knew exactly what he was doing by targeting the building gossip. Then came the packages. Every few days, I'd get these deliveries I never ordered. Adult toys from websites I'd never even heard of, all addressed to me with my full name, but paid for with prepaid cards so they couldn't be traced. The delivery guys would smirk or avoid eye contact when I answered the door, and I knew they could see what company names were on the boxes. One afternoon, Chloe answered the door before I could stop her and asked me why someone sent us a package from Lover's Paradise. Try explaining that to an 8-year-old. I started refusing deliveries, but then they'd just get left on our doorstep for everyone to see. The worst part was when these catalogs started arriving in my mailbox. Hardcore adult material mixed in with my regular mail. Stuff so explicit that I had to grab the mail before Chloe could see it. I was basically being slut-shamed by a kid who probably hadn't even had a real girlfriend yet. Everything came to a head on a Friday evening in early November. Chloe was at her dad's for the weekend, which was the only reason I hadn't completely lost it yet. At least she was getting breaks from this nightmare every other week. I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted and dreading what new hell might be waiting for me, when I noticed my living room curtains looked weird from outside. Getting closer, I realized they were slightly parted, which was strange because I always kept them perfectly closed now, paranoid about giving Dustin any view into our apartment. As I walked up to fix them, something moved in the gap, a quick flash of light being pulled back. My chest got tight as I carefully approached the window from the side, staying out of direct view, and peeked through a tiny corner of the curtain. There was Dustin, standing at his window with his phone raised, recording through the 3-inch gap in my curtains. He was so focused on trying to see inside my apartment that he didn't notice me watching him watch me. I banged on the window hard enough to rattle the frame, and I'll never forget the expression on his face when he realized he'd been caught. Instead of looking embarrassed or scared, he smiled, this slow, deliberate grin that made my stomach turn to ice. He kept his phone pointed at me and actually waved with his free hand, mouthing words I couldn't make out through the glass. I yanked my curtains completely closed and immediately called 911. But by the time the cops showed up 15 minutes later, Dustin was back inside his apartment, claiming he'd been gaming all evening and had no idea what I was talking about. The officers took my statement, but said that without the actual footage or him still being at the window, it was just my word against his. One of them, this younger cop who seemed genuinely concerned, suggested I look into getting security cameras and maybe staying somewhere else for a while if I felt unsafe. But where was I supposed to go? This was our home, and I couldn't afford to just pick up and move. That night changed everything for me. I decided I was done being a victim and started planning my counterattack. First thing Saturday morning, I drove to Best Buy and maxed out my credit card on security equipment. 4 cameras that could record in night vision, motion sensor lights for our doorway, and this doorbell camera that sent alerts straight to my phone. I spent the entire day installing everything myself, YouTube tutorials playing on repeat while I drilled holes and ran cables. I also did something else. I started documenting everything obsessively. Every weird noise, every time I saw him watching me, every piece of trash that mysteriously appeared on our doorstep went into a notebook with dates, times, and photos. Story 3: The Pack of Untrained Dogs. The house next door used to be quiet until the Andersons moved in last August. I was 8 months pregnant then, waddling around our backyard trying to set up the nursery furniture my husband Craig had assembled wrong twice already. We'd bought this place in the suburbs of Charlotte specifically for the big fenced yard, the good schools, the safe neighborhood where kids could play outside without worry. The Andersons seemed nice enough at first, mid-20s couple who drove a beat-up Subaru with hiking stickers all over the back window. They waved when they moved in, apologized for the noise from the U-Haul, normal neighbor stuff. Then came their first dog, a massive German Shepherd mix they called Thor. No big deal, lots of people have dogs around here. But Thor wasn't like the Golden Retriever 2 houses down or the little Beagle across the street. Within a week, I noticed Thor was always in their backyard, never on walks, just pacing along the fence line like he was plotting something. The Andersons' yard started changing too. Patches of dead grass appeared where Thor did his business, and nobody ever seemed to clean it up. By September, they'd added a second dog, some kind of pit bull mix with one blue eye and one brown eye that made him look permanently unhinged. They called him Diesel. Now I had 2 huge dogs barking at all hours, charging the fence whenever I tried to water my tomatoes. Craig said I was being paranoid, that pregnancy was making me anxious about everything, but I knew something was wrong with how those dogs acted. The way they'd go silent and still whenever I walked past, tracking me with their eyes like I was prey. Baby Ella arrived in early September, and that's when things got worse. The day we brought her home from the hospital, 3 more dogs had appeared in the Andersons' yard. A boxer with a scarred face, a husky that never stopped howling, and something that looked like a Rottweiler mixed with a small bear. 5 dogs total now, none of them fixed, none of them trained. The smell from their yard started drifting into our windows even when they were closed. I watched from our kitchen as the dogs established a pack hierarchy, fighting over food, mounting each other, tearing apart anything the Andersons left outside. They destroyed a patio set within 2 days, leaving twisted metal and shredded cushions scattered across the dirt that used to be grass. The fence between our yards was only 4 feet high, and I'd seen Thor clear it once already when he was chasing a squirrel into our garden. The first real incident happened on a Monday morning in late September. I was in the nursery changing Ella when I heard this wet, heavy breathing right outside the window. Diesel had jumped the fence and was standing in our side yard, his mismatched eyes fixed on the window, tongue hanging out and dripping saliva onto our newly planted hydrangeas. He just stood there for maybe 5 minutes, not moving except for his chest heaving with each breath. I grabbed my phone to call Craig, but by the time I looked back, Diesel was gone. When I checked the yard later, there were deep scratches in the dirt beneath Ella's window, like he'd been trying to dig down to the foundation. I found tufts of his gray fur caught on our rose bushes and a pile of fresh feces right on our doormat, too deliberate to be random, like he was marking our house as his territory. I tried talking to the Andersons that afternoon. The wife, Bridget, answered the door wearing pajama pants with cartoon cats on them and a tank top covered in what looked like dried dog slobber. The smell that came from inside their house hit me like a physical wall. Ammonia, rot, and something else I couldn't identify but made me want to gag. She listened to me explaining about Diesel jumping the fence, nodding along with this vacant smile, her fingers twisted in her unwashed hair. "Oh yeah, he does that sometimes," she said, like I was telling her about the weather. "He's just curious about the baby crying. Dogs have really good hearing, you know. He probably thinks she's a puppy or something." The casual way she said it made my chest tighten. Behind her, I could see into their living room. The hardwood floors were scratched to hell, there were holes chewed in the drywall, and one of the dogs had torn apart their couch cushions, leaving foam scattered everywhere like snow. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time Ella made a sound, I'd jolt awake thinking about what Bridget said. The dogs thinking my baby sounded like a puppy. Around 3 a.m., I heard them all start barking at once, not their usual random noise, but synchronized, purposeful, like they were communicating. I crept to our bedroom window and peered through the blinds. All 5 dogs were lined up along our shared fence, sitting perfectly still in a row, their eyes reflecting the moonlight as they stared directly at our house. The husky had something in his mouth. It took me a second to realize it was one of Ella's toys, a stuffed rabbit we'd lost in the yard the day before. He wasn't chewing it, just holding it gently like he was saving it. They stayed there for an hour, never barking again, never moving, just watching. I took photos on my phone, but Craig said I was overreacting when I showed him in the morning. The breaking point came on a Saturday when Craig had gone to Home Depot to buy materials for a higher fence, finally believing me after he'd seen Thor clear our fence twice in one day. I was alone with Ella, feeding her in the living room, when I heard the back door creak. I always locked it, always, but there it was, slowly swinging open. The boxer appeared first, his scarred face low to the ground, muscles tensed like he was stalking something. Then came Diesel, then the Rottweiler mix. They moved through my kitchen like they owned it, sniffing everything, leaving muddy paw prints on my white tiles. The smell they brought with them was overwhelming, wet dog mixed with feces and something rancid like meat left in the sun. They knew exactly where they were going, heading straight for the living room where I sat frozen with Ella against my chest. The boxer's jaw was massive, his teeth yellowed and sharp when he pulled his lips back in what wasn't quite a growl but wasn't friendly either. I held Ella tighter, her tiny body warm against mine, while these 3 huge dogs formed a semicircle around my chair. The Rottweiler mix kept making this low rumbling sound in his chest, not quite a growl, but something primitive that made every instinct scream at me to run. But I couldn't move, couldn't risk triggering their prey drive. Diesel came closer, his blue and brown eyes never leaving Ella's face. He leaned in, his nose almost touching her blanket, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. His breath was hot and smelled like rotting garbage. Then he did something that still makes me sick to remember. He licked his lips slowly, deliberately, the same way my old dog used to when I was preparing his dinner. The boxer started pacing, his claws clicking on the hardwood, circling us like he was looking for the best angle of approach. For 10 minutes, maybe 15, they just studied us, learning our scent, memorizing our fear. The only sound was their breathing and Ella starting to fuss, probably sensing my terror. Then Ella started crying, that high-pitched newborn wail that sounds almost like an animal in distress. The dog's entire demeanor shifted instantly. Their ears perked up, bodies tense, and a Rottweiler mix took a step forward, his massive head tilting as he focused on her with an intensity that my heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. The boxer stopped pacing and lowered into what looked like a hunting crouch, his scarred face inches from the floor, eyes locked on Ella's moving blanket. Diesel began making these short, sharp huffing sounds like he was getting excited, working himself up for something. I tried to shush Ella, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The more she cried, the more agitated they became, and I realized with absolute clarity that they were deciding whether she was food. Not playing, not curious, they were evaluating my 2-month-old daughter as prey. The Rottweiler's mouth opened slightly, strings of drool connecting his upper and lower jaw, and I could see every one of his teeth. That's when the Husky and Thor appeared in the doorway, completing the pack. 5 massive dogs now, blocking every exit, their eyes all trained on my crying baby. The Husky still had her stuffed rabbit in his mouth, but now it was mangled, wet with saliva and torn open, white stuffing spilling out like entrails. Thor, the German Shepherd mix, was the biggest of them all, probably 120 pounds, and he moved with the confidence of an alpha. He walked straight up to us, no hesitation, and put his enormous head right next to Ella. I could feel his breath on my arm, see the pulse in his neck, watch his nose twitch as he processed her scent. Then he made a sound I'll never forget, this deep, guttural rumble that seemed to come from somewhere ancient, something that triggered every evolutionary alarm in my brain. The other dogs responded immediately, forming a tighter circle, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I moved wrong, if I showed fear, if I did anything to trigger them, they would attack. My phone was on the side table, just out of reach, and Craig wouldn't be home for at least another hour. I did the only thing I could think of. I started humming. Not a lullaby, but this deep, monotonous sound from my chest, almost matching Thor's rumble. It was something I remembered from a documentary, how the mother would vocalize to establish dominance over the pack around her pups. Ridiculous, desperate, but Thor's ears twitched and he pulled back slightly. I kept humming, louder now, adding a slight growl to it, trying to sound bigger than I was. The boxer sat down first, then Diesel, like they were confused by this new sound. I slowly stood up, still making that weird growl song, holding Ella high against my shoulder so I seemed taller. The Rottweiler mix backed up a step. Thor watched me with those intelligent eyes, and I swear he was calculating whether I was worth challenging. For 30 seconds that felt like hours, we stayed locked in this standoff. Then I took one step toward them, still humming that weird growl song, and the Husky dropped the rabbit. Another step, and the boxer whined. On my 3rd step, Thor turned and walked out, and like magic, they all followed him, filing out through my kitchen and back door like they'd never been hunting my baby at all.